Hi everyone, welcome once again to this self-knowledge course. Today we are going to be having the topic number 19 in our course for achieving self-knowledge and awakening of consciousness. And the title of today's topic is states and events. And well, this is a very important lecture, a very fascinating subject because it teaches us how to live with greater intelligence, by learning how to properly combine the external events of our daily lives with an appropriate internal state of our being. So let's begin by reflecting on some of the contrasts that we often see in life. Contrasts that can be quite surprising if we take a closer look. We will notice that many times the appearances, the outward appearances, do not match what a person is experiencing on the inside. This so that we start like differentiating between the external states and the external events. So take like a moment to consider this. In life, we see, for example, very wealthy people, right? People who have all the luxuries that others can only dream of, right? They may own mansions, have large sums of money, beautiful families, and simply everything, having everything that one could only desire. Yet, despite all that, they may still suffer deeply. They may be plagued by constant worries, health issues, heartbreak, betrayal, loss, or even problems like sexual impotence. Why not, right? And often, despite having everything, they continue to feel the same inner emptiness, that existential void that no amount of money, of luxury, of prestige, or fame can ever truly really fill. So we've all seen the tragic cases of, for example, famous singers, actors, or powerful public figures who, in spite of their success, they fall into depression, some even taking their own lives, right? And that is quite surprising because from the outside, many people believe that if they could only achieve what these people have, they would be finally happy. We say, if I only had a better job, I would be happy, right? If I only had more money, if I were famous, then I'd be happy. But it doesn't work that way. What we fail to understand is that true happiness doesn't come from the external circumstances at all. It comes from having the right internal state. That is something that we must reflect on. And we must also observe, analyzing this contrast of life, is that on the other hand, we also find people who have very little by society's standards. They may not meet the usual definition of success, and yet they live joyfully, they smile often, and they sincerely enjoy life's simple everyday moments. And why? Because happiness doesn't depend on external events at all. It depends on our inner state of being. So let's dive a little deeper into this. Let's take a closer look at the difference between the external events and the internal state, and how we can learn to combine the two of them in a conscious and an intelligent way, right? So, what is an event? Events are all the situations that happens to us externally. They are the circumstances, the experiences that unfold around us and throughout the day. For example, in just one day, you might have, I don't know, breakfast with your family, commute to work, have lunch with your coworkers, wait in a long line in a bank, or get into an argument with your partner, right? And sometimes we might face much more intense events like being robbed, like, for example, losing a loved one, or, for example, getting into a serious accident. All of those are events, things that happen in our external life, right? And when we talk about our own life, We usually describe it as a series of such events. What we went through as children, as teenagers, our graduation day, our wedding day, the birth of our child, and so on. And then in that story, we tend to include names, dates, places, external facts that mark all those moments. But the reality is that is not all. That is not the whole picture, right? What we usually leave out is the internal aspect, the mood, the internal state that we were in during those events. And that is very important because it is often our inner state that determines the true quality of any experience that we are living. So when we talk about an internal state, we are talking about our state of mind, our mood, our emotional condition in the face of any given event, right? It's important to understand that events are external while the inner states are internal. However, our inner state plays a crucial role in shaping how we actually experience each event of our life. For example, imagine a party. Everyone is attending the same event, but not everyone feels the same way. Some may be joyful, excited, right? Others can be bored or anxious, and some might be distracted or worried about something. So even though they are in the exact same place, living the exact same event, each person is living a completely different experience. Because of what? Because of their internal state. And this actually shows the importance of developing conscious inner states so that we can face life events with awareness, and so we can truly learn from the events of our life. Only by combining our inner state with the external events in a conscious way, we can extract the wisdom that every experience has to offer us. That's why it is essential to learn how to correctly align our internal states with the events that we go through. It is also important to recognize that we often miscombine our internal states with the events we experience, right? There are many situations where our emotional reactions seems appropriate on the surface, but in reality, when we observe them closely, we see that they are excessive or that they are completely out of control. Take, for example, a funeral. It is natural to feel grief, right? But sometimes we see some people so overwhelmed by the situation, by the inner state that they are in, that they collapse emotionally. They cry uncontrollably, shouting, or even say they want to die. That is actually out of control, right? Or consider a celebration. Someone might be enjoying themselves, but then they drink too much, start dancing on the table, and lose all sense of moderation in that situation. And actually, these are examples of how even if our emotional response to the event seems to fit the situation, our lack of inner control lead us to experience the event in an unconscious and unbalanced way. And when we don't know sorry, how to manage our internal states, we miss the opportunity to live these events consciously and to truly learn from the situations and to grow spiritually from those situations. There are also situations where our internal state clearly doesn't match at all the external event that we are living. For example, someone might start crying in the middle of a joyful celebration, right? Or someone might laugh and make jokes during a funeral. These mismatches are striking and often uncomfortable, right, for everyone that is there involved. And if we take time to reflect on this, we begin to see that it's not just extreme emotions that cause trouble. Whether our inner state seems to match the event or not, if that inner state is inappropriate or unconscious, it leads us to confusion, to conflicts, and actually to an emotional imbalance. So this is one of the key reasons we often fail to get, why we often fail to get the best out of all our life experiences, right? Because we miss the valuable lessons hidden in each situation, because our inner state doesn't allow us to face the event with awareness, right? And we also find that sometimes when long awaited events finally arrive, they don't feel the way we expected, right? Sometimes something seems to be missed, right? Take the example of someone who has been dreaming of her wedding day for years, planning every detail so that everything would be perfect, and magical. But when the big day finally comes, she's caught up in the details, worrying about guests, about the food arriving later, the musicians that they are not playing the right songs, that she can't really enjoy the moment. What was meant to be a joyful and unforgettable occasion ends up feeling tedious, and even disappointing, right? And on the other hand, there are moments that come without any planning at all. Simple, spontaneous experiences that turn out to be deeply enjoyable, right? And meaningful. And why? Because in those moments, we happen to be in the right internal state. And that inner harmony allows us to fully receive and enjoy what life was offering, the event that life is bringing us, right? And well, we can also observe that many times the event itself is directly caused by the inner state we are in. For example, we carry a bad attitude, and that attitude can poison every event we experience throughout the day, right? Turning ordinary situations into bitter and unpleasant situations. And in some cases, an event as serious as someone's death may result from an inner state that the person was unable to change. Perhaps a constant state of depression, right, of anger, for example, or maybe that the person was overtaken by this, this um, internal state of violence, and because of that the person, for example, end up killing someone or being killed, right? So you can see that the event can be originated by the inner state we are in. And events, for example, like, I don't know, being unfaithful to our partner might have happened because of the particular inner state we were in at that time. Perhaps a state of lust or resentment with our partner, and so on. And well, actually, this is something truly important to observe. It shows us that psychological defects that we carry inside are the ones that manipulate the internal states that we are in at every moment. They create this mistaken external state, and those states influence how we act when facing different events. In truth, we have no control of ourselves at this moment. Our psychological defects, the many wrong ways of being that live inside us. Who has control of ourselves? Being in control is something very, very different. It's being in and actually, achieving that control begins when we stop allowing those psychological defects to drag us from an inner state to another. When we practice psychological death constantly, moments by moment, practicing what we call death in motion, observing ourselves, understanding that what is manifesting in us is psychological defects, asking our Divine Mother to eliminate it. That is how we allow our consciousness to express itself in each event that we are experiencing, and then we are truly on the path to wisdom, right? Because a wise person can be cheerful, yes, but never overtaken by the wild excitement. A wise person can be sad, but never sunk in despair, in hopelessness. No, it can be calm in the midst of violence, can be moderate in the middle of an orgy, can be chaste while surrounded by lust and so on. To reach this level of self mastery, we must learn how to correctly combine our internal states with the external events that we face, because that is the only intelligent way to live. So, how do we correctly combine our internal states with the external events? Let's take a look on the right steps that will help us achieve this right combination. The first step is always self observation. No matter the event we are living, no matter the situation we are facing, self observation. Because only by turning our attention inward can we recognize the internal state we are in and the psychological defects that are causing that internal state. So, through self observation, we might discover that we are, for example, anxious, or that we are, for example, overexcited, that we are sad, that we are angry, that we are afraid, whatever. So, self observation is the key. Is what will allow us to make ourselves aware of that internal state. So let's remember this important principle. Sorry, we can only change what we are able to observe and to understand within ourselves. So, self observation is the key. And the next step is to become conscious of the event we are about to experience or that we are already experiencing, right? And then we must apply a logical confrontation. We must as soon as we discover our internal state, we must make the contrast, right, of that internal state with the event that we are living or that we are about to live. And we must ask ourselves, is the inner state I am in right now appropriate for this event? That is a logical confrontation. And by doing this, we will realize that the right internal state for any event always includes staying centered, focused, right, fully present in a state of inner peace, remembering ourselves, never forgetting of ourselves, balanced, all our centers in balance, in control, in total control of our emotions, of our mind, and of our sexual energy, of course. And why? Because only in this state of inner balance, of inner peace, of self awareness, can our consciousness truly express itself. And only by remaining in this state of self awareness can we detect the psychological defects that are trying to make us react in a wrong way, pushing us toward making mistakes, right? And once we've made this inner confrontation and we have identified the correct states for that event, the next step is to maintain self control. And we do this by practicing psychological death emotion, observing and eliminating every psychological defect that arises in our emotions, in our thoughts, and that wants to take cover our behavior. You know, what we say, what we do. We observe them, and as soon as we recognize a defect is manifesting, making us feel this, making us think like this, making us act like this, or talking in a wrong way, we must eliminate it by asking our inner divine mother, the force of love of our consciousness, to disintegrate that way of being. And that is how we remain in self remembering from the beginning to the end of the event that we are living. So let's take an example. Let's say that we are going for a job interview. Okay? And through self observation, we might detect, for example, that we are in a state of fear, anxiety, maybe, right? Impatience, or a sense of powerlessness, Or on the other hand, we might notice that we have an idealized view of the job. We have like this needy part of us wanting approval, or that is manifesting in us a self that wants to impress, right? And when we observe this, we understand that all of these are defects. All of those are psychological defects. That is not our consciousness manifesting. And if we don't eliminate them, they will take control. And our consciousness won't be the one expressing itself in that job interview, right? But if we apply the technique that we are learning here, we will draw valuable lessons from every event that we go through. Because by remaining balanced and conscious, we'll experience each situation in the best possible way. This also allows to transcend any recurrence related to that event, because remember that the psychological defects that could have taken over that situation, making, for example, the recurrences to happen again, they were eliminated. So, for instance, if we find ourselves in an argument with someone, and instead of identifying with the anger that wants to take over, we observe that anger and we eliminate each egoic reaction, then we'll be able to maintain the right internal state. And that will help us resolve the situation in the best way, allowing us to transcend, in that case, the recurrence that was meant to happen. We prevent that to repeat itself in that situation with that person, right? And beyond that, we'll also be able to extract the wisdom, the teaching that the experience was meant to give us, right? And well, there's something that we must deeply understand because it's very important. And it is how this topic that we are having today connects to the law of correspondences and to the law of attraction, because those are the laws that tells us as it is inside, so it is outside, right? And our ego attracts what resonates with its vibration, right? So this sorry, this means that the internal state we maintain regularly determines the kind of circumstances that we are going to be attracting into our lives, right? Since our inner life is the magnet that draws in external events, it becomes actually urgent to eliminate every mistaken psychological state from our psyche. For instance, a person who constantly allows sadness, depression to take over will begin to attract situations that reinforces those states, situations that make them feel even worse. People may start, for example, distancing themselves, betrayal might occur, things may go wrong at work, and so on. But why? Because a wrong internal state becomes a magnet for misfortune. And the same applies when someone constantly holds on to deeply, deeply mistaken inner states like pessimism, like hatred, like melancholy, like self pity, anger, violence, and so on. That person will keep attracting very difficult and very painful situations into their lives. Remember, in the previous lecture, we were talking about self consideration, right? And how these attract, this make us to be all the time in this constant psychological song that attracts hard situations into our lives. And the problem is that when we allow these wrong inner states to be in us, to exist within us, we don't just make our own life bitter, we also end up poisoning the lives of those that are around us, right? But instead of reflecting on this truth, what do we usually do? We fall into self-consideration, we justify ourselves, we believe ourselves to be victims, right? We believe that we are in the right, we convince ourselves that we are good people, and in doing so, we never ever truly change. That is why it's absolutely essential to use self observation to catch these mistaken inner states as soon as they try to arise in us, right? To recognize when we are already in one of these very wrong inner states so we can immediately begin to eliminate them from our psyche. That is absolutely important. And there's another aspect that we need to reflect on in connection with this topic, and that is the personal events. We um, we must understand that each of us experiences personal events, those difficult or uncomfortable situations that arise in our daily lives. And what truly matters is realizing that some situations can be changed while others cannot be changed. And every situation, whether modifiable or not, comes to us as an opportunity to develop the virtues and the wisdom that we are still lacking, right? So, yes, there are personal events that are modifiable and others that are non modifiable. But in both cases, the key will always be the internal state with which we face those events. And this is important to grasp because so often we waste energy and time. We get caught up in negative internal states instead of recognizing when a situation can actually be resolved and then taking clear actions to fix that situation while maintaining the right inner attitude, right? Let's take an example. You, for example, rush out of the house, and once you are already on the street, you realize that you've locked the door with your keys still inside, right? This is a personal event. It is definitely uncomfortable, even frustrating, but it is also modifiable, right? Now, if we don't apply what we are learning here today, what usually happens? We get completely identified with the situation, defects like despair or anger start to arise. We complain, we yell, we might even start blaming our partner for leaving the keys inside, and the partner blames us back. And suddenly, a simple problem has become a very unpleasant experience. But if we put this teaching into practice, we begin by observing ourselves. We notice and eliminate the psychological defects that begin to appear, and we analyze what the correct inner state should be for this moment. We'll realize that what we need is calm, right? We accept that this is a modifiable event and we shift our focus to the solution, whether that is calling a locksmith or even breaking a window, for example. And we carried out the solution while maintaining in self control, holding the right internal state from the beginning of the situation to the end, right? Now, the second type of personal events are the non modifiable ones. These are painful situations that cannot be changed, no matter what we do. For example, the death of a loved one or a pet, for example, or discovering that our partner has been unfaithful. No matter how much we want to fix or undo those events, they've already happened. They are now unchangeable facts. And that's why we often sink into despair. We become so identified, so strongly identified with the pain that we are experiencing, sorry, that we fall into deep suffering, right? We lose control of our inner state instead of accepting the reality and choosing to live the situation in the best possible way. How we react to the different events in our daily life is a reflection of the quality of the inner work that we are doing. But non modifiable events, especially, have the power to plunge us into suffering. And those states of suffering block out our consciousness. They prevent us from awakening and from seeing the wisdom that is actually hidden in that experience that we are living. So, whether the situation is modifiable or not, reacting in the wrong way only makes things worse and can even lead us to tragic outcomes, right? People who react irrationally to life's events can easily find themselves in a hospital, cemetery, or in prison, right? Take, for example, someone who catches their partner being unfaithful. If they fail to maintain a correct internal state, they could lose control and end up committing a crime, right? Or someone who feels publicly humiliated or slandered. If they react impulsively, they could do something reckless that lands them in the hospital or behind bars. And the real problem is this: we don't know how to avoid or escape the suffering that the situation is bringing to us, especially when it comes to those difficult personal events, and even more so with the ones the events that we are living cannot be changed, right? That is why we need to reflect on two key aspects that can help us free ourselves from suffering. The first thing that we must do is not to become identified with the pain. That may sound difficult, but we must remember that we only fall into suffering when we identify with the pain. And that's a real danger with those non modifiable events or personal situations, right? We tend to become completely identified with the pain. We even feed that pain with negative thoughts, with negative emotions. We give in to despair, to grief, to self pity, to anger, to resentment. And all of that only makes the pain like grow stronger. And as a result, we lose the ability to act consciously. And we miss the lesson that is hidden in that experience. So we must remember consciousness does not suffer. Never. Consciousness observes, consciousness understands. Yes, pain may come, but suffering is always optional. So we will discover that when we don't identify with the problem, when we don't get lost in the problem, the pain starts to fade. So, what should we do? We must put into practice what we've learned here today. We must maintain a correct internal state through self observation and psychological depth. And every time that pain tries to take us out of that harmonious state, of that serenity, we don't allow it. We ask for the elimination of every memory, of every thought, of every emotion, of every sensation that tries us to make us suffer. And this will allow us to stay in the present moment, in the here and now. That is like the first step, right? So for not to plunge into pain, into suffering. And the second thing is to reflect and understand that everything passes. Everything we've received at some point we are going to lose it. Everything that had everything that has come into our lives at some point will leave, right? So clinging into things, refusing to let go, is what creates suffering. Attachment to things, to events, situations, to people is what creates suffering. So we must learn to see life for what it really is: a film made of many scenes. When we manage to see life in this way, without becoming attached to the scenes and while maintaining always the right internal attitude, we can begin to learn from each event. Many people dream of escaping to a mountain or to a monastery to find peace, happiness, or enlightenment. But the truth is that only in the psychological gymnasium of daily life, with all of its demands and circumstances, is where we find the right training ground to truly know ourselves, to truly transform ourselves, and to awaken. So we must learn to grasp the lesson, the inner opportunity that each event in life is bringing us, right? What truly matters is actually understanding this. External events would never be as important as the way we react to them. And the most powerful weapon that a person can carry through life is a correct psychological state. That alone is what guarantees real peace. And well, people, this was the topic we wanted to share with you today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them. We'll be happy to solve any question you have. And I would like to invite you to our next conference in the psychological pillar of wisdom, right? Where we will explore the topic of the psychological country. In that lecture, we will dive into the importance of living in the present moment, of letting go of the illusion that we are already good people, and of shifting our center of gravity so that we can begin the return to the source, to the absolute. So please don't miss that very, very interesting lecture that we are going to be sharing with you next Monday, right? And well, this has been today's topic. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please leave us your questions in the comment box. And if you are not yet part of our Telegram or WhatsApp group, you can find the links to join our group here in the description of this video. And well, thank you very much and have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.